This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that aims to elevate the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host Paul, and today I'm so excited to welcome Lisa Nguyen, Pharmacist, founder and CEO of Astrid Dispensary. Astrid is Australia's first female-led dispensary specialising in cannabinoid medicine. In 2021, Astrid was awarded Australia's Dispensary of the Year, and Lisa was awarded Australia's most trailblazing pharmacist by the Australian Journal of Pharmacists. In the 2 and a bit years since its inception, Astrid has grown from 1 to 30 employees and going from 0 to 18,000 patients across Australia. Lisa is a true trailblazer in this industry, and I'm so excited to have her on the show. If you enjoy what you hear, please follow us on Instagram at giveandtoke. If you want to get in touch with us via email giveandtoke@gmail.com. It also really helps the show giving us a 5-star review and following, subscribing, all that biz. But enough of that for now. Please enjoy my conversation with Lisa Nguyen from Astrid Dispensary. I see that you've recently spent some time in Japan and Bali. Was this for business or pleasure?
You know what? It was for pleasure, but my team will tell you that no matter where I go, I'm always thinking about business. I mean, the Japan was right after the Astrid Assembly, and I literally had not had a break in the 3 years or so that we've launched Astrid. And so my husband and I were tossing up where we could go for a quick break, and he chose Japan, which was the worst place to put someone who thinks a lot, who's always on their feet and goes at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so I went to Japan and I got really stressed.
Great relaxing break after 3 years of work.
So stressed, and I got so mad at my husband. I'm like, why did you choose this country? I feel worse than I was in Australia. Let's go back home now. And I got off the plane, and I kid you not, the first day that I got to Japan, I went outside, went for a walk for about 3 minutes, and then I cried. I'm like, I'm exhausted and I feel more stressed here.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy and pretty busy there. I haven't been for about 10 years, but it definitely was a hustle and bustle.
Yeah.
Did you manage to benefit from the seemingly new development of CBD stores in Japan? Did that at least help you calm down a little bit?
That was the best part of my trip, honestly. So we went for about 2 weeks, and we went to about 3 or 4 CBD cafes. And that was the highlight. So that I half forgave him for, bustle and dragging me to different temples and the underground train system. But the CBD cafe scene in Japan was amazing. And I went there, and I went with the intent to get to know the owners of each of the cafes as well. So there's a bit of a language barrier, but that it's funny how cannabis, no matter if you don't understand the same language, we still understood CBD oil. We still understood vape pens. We still understood the history of cannabis. So it was just incredible to be able to have that connection with someone where we both spoke totally different languages. And so, yeah, I got to know a few. There was one particular CBD cafe that was in Kyoto that was owned by a half Australian person. And so then I actually had the opportunity to really deep dive into, why it was that he decided to do this and what were the regulations in Japan. And it was really interesting in that he was saying how in Japan, it's not that they made cannabis legal. It was just that they realized that there was a loophole in the system and that CBD was never prohibited. And so that's why there's a rise of, CBD cafes. And you'll see that in Japan, there's THC is totally illegal. So these cafes they're just isolates. There's no THC at all. But even then, when I went to this cafe, I ordered a matcha latte with some drops of broad spectrum CBD oil. And there's cute little chairs that you can sit on and cannabis books everywhere. And they were busy. They had lines outside waiting to go in, and they had people behind the counter educating on them on different types of CBD, and vape pens were allowed there as well. So you go to a counter and there's different types of vape pens, and then you could choose the flavor and then the different concentration of CBD, which was in Australia, you still need a prescription for that.
It's such a great way for people to be able to kind of step off the street and try cannabis. You know, you had some experience in Canada, and a big part of it is just that normalization, that people can just go, oh, I wonder what that is, and step into a place that creates that environment. And we'll talk about that with Astrid down the track in this episode, because I really believe that's what you've done. Even though it's still a heavily restricted Schedule 8 drug, you've created an environment that people can ask questions and feel comfortable. So I look forward to diving into that a little bit deeper. I know you spent some time in Bali as well, and I've seen that you're kind of like creating ambitions and aspirations for the year. What were you up to there?
So Bali came about because I said to my husband, "You took me to Japan. I need a holiday where I can rest." So we went to Bali, and literally went on a wellness retreat for 10 days. It was great timing because I really wanted to reset my intentions for the year as well. We have a lot of things planned for 2023 in Astrid, and I knew that if I was going to lead my team into this year, I needed to make sure that I was ready. And so I needed this time to rest and recoup. And if we are, a company that is trying to help others get better, we need to make sure we fill our own cup as well. So I went to this magical wellness retreat for 10 days where we did meditation at 8 o'clock in the morning and then yoga at 4 p.m. every single day. Everything was, everyone there was there with the purpose of getting better or feeling better or just slowing down. And there was cold plunges and saunas, and it was amazing. And it was great because when I allow my brain to not do the day-to-day and not be in business mind frame, it's a magical world that my brain takes me to. So I bought I literally was mid massage, and it was like an hour massage, and I was like, I thought of a really great idea for Astrid. So I'm so sorry. Can we pause this massage? I just got to go run down to the shop and get a book, get a pen. I need to draw this out right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I had so many aha moments. And I'm like, oh my God, I really understand this. And also a lot of time to reflect on the last couple of years in the cannabis space in Australia, which honestly has been such a roller coaster. Like, it's so exhausting. As an industry, we've achieved so much. So I really do hope that everyone in the industry takes the time to really pause, reflect on what they are achieving individually as a company or a group, and then collectively as an industry, what we're doing and what we're moving forward for. And I had the chance to really think about that and my purpose in this industry and my purpose for my team and also my purpose for my patients, because I think that's really important for you to have really great clarity on, because otherwise it's so easy to get trapped by trends or the newest shiny thing in the industry. It's so easy to do that because it's such a fast-paced industry. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but for me, it's really important for me to know where it is that I'm heading so that I can lead my team and also protect them as well, and also support them as they grow as well, because essentially they are the future of this cannabis industry, right? So we need to make sure we equip them and educate them with the tools that they need to succeed.
To speak so highly about your people and your team and the obligation you feel you have to do the work you do is really inspiring. And I'm glad that this early in the episode, it kind of sets the tone for what kind of boss you are and what kind of person you are and what kind of thinker you are, because that's exactly why I have you on this show, because I want people to understand the really special work you're doing. And I'm looking forward to unpacking that as the episode goes on. But I do want to pull it right back to understanding your starting point in pharmacy. What was it that drew you into pharmacy? How did you get this start?
So my story in pharmacy is, I think everything about my life is really ironic. I never wanted to do pharmacy. So I grew up in Australia, and I was always really confused as a child in Australia because I've come from a very traditional Asian background. My parents are migrants, and so they came to Australia to create a really great life for themselves, and they came here with nothing. And so traditionally when a lot of Vietnamese immigrants come to Australia, they work really hard so that the kids can become a doctor or a lawyer or a pharmacist. And so that was embedded into my parents, and they worked so hard. My parents are hustlers, and so that part of me it's ingrained. Like, I grew up in car rides with my parents, in mid business meetings. So it's just normal for me, but they wanted me to be a pharmacist. And so I went to a really, really competitive high school in Melbourne, and it was an all-girls school that you had to do an exam to get into. And so me getting into that exam, I was really shit at maths, science, anything that requires analytical thinking. but I was really, really naturally good at creativity. I was really good at English. I got I always got really high marks. And I got into that school from my English skills, like my exam scores for writing and creativity were really, really high. And so I somehow got into this school, and everyone in the school is a high achiever. And so when I went into the school, the average like high school enter score was about 96, 97, and I really brought it down because my parents chose all the kind of like more traditional subjects, and I really wanted to do like English writing and history and geography and all these kind of things, but I was doing further mathematics and all these things that I wasn't really good at. Basically, for university, I applied for commerce arts at Melbourne Uni, got in, and I was stoked. Came home after orientation day. My mum comes running down the driveway, waving an envelope, and she's like, "We're so proud of you. You got into pharmacy school." And I'm like, "What? I didn't apply to pharmacy school." She's like, so it turns out my mother, my beautiful hustler mother, applied to every other state, made a username and password on my behalf. I don't know how she managed all that. And I got into Tasmania, Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. And I ended up going to Wagga Wagga for university, which is about 4 hours away. She put me into a car, drove me there for 4 hours, chucked me into this town, and she's like, "See you later. You're on your own."
And that's some pretty rural Australia right there. Like Wagga is a bigger town, but it's still pretty, country.
Yeah, when I went, I was probably one of the first few Asians in that town, and so I went into my degree, so my pharmacy degree, with intent of not studying. And I was like, you know what? I've studied my whole life. I'm not going to study for the degree. I'm just going to enjoy my life and wing university. And then when I come back to Melbourne, I'll get into arts.
Yeah.
That was my plan. That was my plan. Grand plan. And so first 2 years we lived on campus, and it was all really fun and really great, and we had a great time. And the second university, I get a call from my friend Kelvin, and he's like, "You know what, Lisa, we want to move to town, and we think that you should move to town with us because we're going to get this really cute house and we'll have like the best 2 years of our lives before we graduate." I was like, okay. So I moved to town with these guys. It was basically 4 guys plus me. 3 months in, I realized they asked me to move in with them, not because of my friendship, but because they wanted me to cook and clean for them. So I was, I think, 3 months into living with Kelvin and the guys. And Kelvin came home one day with like a planter box. I was like, "What are you doing, Kelvin?" And he's like, he was afraid to tell me that he was going to grow weed in our backyard. And so he's like, "Oh, I'm growing tomatoes because I really want you to make us some really delicious tomato pasta." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I think about 2 months later, I was like, "Kelvin, I think the tomatoes are growing." Like, I'm not growing. And so that was kind of like my first journey with cannabis. But after that, my house in Wagga Wagga ended up being the biggest weed house in the whole town. Like people would come all the time and just hang out and talk about cannabis. And my friends in Wagga were so passionate about cannabis, not from a recreational perspective, but also from a pseudo-medicinal perspective as well, because a lot of them suffer from chronic issues, particularly sleep and particularly pain. And I think I didn't really like get that when I was in university because we were using it and it was helping them and that was it. Like even now, one of my friends who was using it back then too, he still uses cannabis for his sleep, but now I've converted him to legal cannabis. And my other friends who has a gluten intolerance, every time she has bread, she would just be in so much nausea and pain, and she would come to our house in Wagga and have a bit of cannabis and she would feel so much better. And then it also became social because would invite people over because they have issues, and then they end up staying and we'll end up talking about their life and their relationship with the plant and all this kind of stuff. And it was just magical. Like it was a really magical time in my life. But that was essentially how my journey in cannabis started many, many years ago.
This is something that I proselytize quite a lot on this show, though, that even the people that are operating legitimately in this industry like you had to start from a, quote unquote, sketchy point. It had to be illegal. It had to be explored. And that's how we get to this point now. We can't just have something become legal like it did in 2016. And all of a sudden we go from 0 to 100. People that never knew anything about it now know everything. In the background, this is what we've been doing while we were younger, while we were at university. We were experimenting, exploring. It was taboo, but like you said, they weren't just using it recreationally. It was a pseudo-medicinal thing, and that's what I found very quickly. While I enjoyed cannabis immediately when I tried it in my late teens, it was that therapeutic value into my 20s that I really looked for and really sought. So even though, yeah, it can be a great time, it is way more something that improves and sustains my life. So it's really cool. I think there's some discomfort about telling those stories about our sketchy past and what we were up to, because we know it was illegal, but we wouldn't be at this point without those experiences.
Definitely not. And I think it's all those people who were willing to take the risk, knowing the benefit even back then when it was illegal, who were the ones really pushing for better access, more advocacy, and really building the future for this plant in our current society.
So moving away from the illegitimate to the legitimate, I understand you worked for Canopy Growth for some time in Canada, which at the time was Canada's largest licensed producer of cannabis. What did you see and learn there?
So Canopy was one of those career kind of milestones that really, for me, I think changed my life, because I got to learn so much. Canopy is such a big company, but the beauty of Canopy is that they also really believe in their people and they really give people opportunity. So for me, someone who's come in with, 2 years of experience in cannabis and a couple of years experience in pharmacy, they saw something in me and they were like, you know what, we're going to fly you to Canada. You can participate in this global business conference for our company and see what you can learn. The best thing about that is that I saw the whole movement, I believe. So you saw the whole grassroots movements. There's a big advocacy arm of Canopy with the OG kind of like people who were doing things during the illicit market, I guess, and who've now made their mark within the legal market. So there's a really amazing lady called Hilary Black, and she's the head of advocacy, I think, at Canopy. I think she still is. And there's a really great story about back in the day how she had a little bicycle and she would literally put just, flour in her backpack, and she would just ride to people's houses and give them flour for free because they were suffering. And that was all during the illicit market. And now she's moved to this big company. But Canopy's had this beautiful way of kind of shaping or structuring a corporation, but still acknowledging the grassroots element of cannabis. And also it is because they do grow their own cannabis as well. I had the opportunity to actually go and see the grow facility and go through the whole journey that the plant goes through. And then also meet people from different parts of the world as well. So because I participated in a global business conference for Canopy, there was the head of country for Denmark, there was the head of country for Africa, and people from different parts of the world. And so there, what people did was everyone got on stage and they kind of summarized where cannabis was in their country and the barriers and strategic things that they could do to help better access within their country. And so it was a really great kind of like stepping stone into understanding that, wow, this is really a global movement. And wow, every single country in the world is going through something different. And access looks so different in so many different countries. And also stigma looks different in every single country as well. So I was so hooked. Like after I was already pretty obsessed with cannabis before, but when I went to Canopy, I think that's where the fire started really growing from within me. And so I was like, every opportunity I would talk to anyone about cannabis. Even my friends in Australia, they were so sick of me talking about cannabis.
Oh yeah,
on our brunch day.
When you go to Canada and you see what they have on offer and what is available there, it's hard not for that to envelop you and to become your whole life.
Exactly, yeah. And I saw dispensaries there. And so like, I think that was one of the turning points for me, because Canopy has a few dispensaries under their brand, and I went to a few to check them out. And I was like, this is crazy. This is what the future should be in Australia. It's sleek. It's minimizing all the clutter associated with, what people associate recreational cannabis with, but also does in a way where you can have a really normal conversation about cannabis without any stigma at all. I felt like I was going into an Apple store and I was buying a phone. And there was some with booths, so you can sit down and literally you can chill with your friends. And one store I walked in and a guy and a girl were going on a date, and it was a first date because I can sense the kind of tension. And I was like, that's a really cool place for a first date.
Any of my friends who talk about wanting to go to Amsterdam for weed tourism, I tell them to go to Canada. Yeah. That is definitely a place where anyone who's got an emerging passion should go spend some time.
For sure. And it was really interesting from my a cultural perspective as well, because in Australia, alcohol is so normal here, right? Like it's so social. Like you go to any bar or pub and it's expected that you drink. Whereas in Canada, it's not expected because cannabis or weed is normal. I was at a bar and people were just like smoking joints outside. And the first response I had was, oh, they're smoking joints. But I'm like, oh my God, I'm in Canada. Why am I thinking this? But It's because I was from Australia, and so we're so used to hiding it or being afraid of doing it in public.
It took me 6 months to stop butting out my joint when I'd see a car coming down the alleyway. Like, honestly, 4 to 6 months it took me to get over that physical response of, oh shit, grown-ups are coming.
Exactly. I met this really awesome nurse in Canada, and she has a side business where she like makes CBD butter. And then she's like, hey, we were at this event, and she's like, hey, do you want to come to my car and I'll show you some of my CBD butter? I was like, okay, that's cool. So she showed me a CBD butter in the car, but she's like, oh, hey, let's, while we're here, I'm just gonna like quickly roll this joint and have it outside my car. I was like, okay. So she's like, oh, just take a seat. So I was sitting in her car in her passenger seat, and she was there in the driver's seat, and she was rolling her joint. But I felt anxiety, and I was like, why did I feel anxiety? This is so normal. But because I've been in that position where I've, in Australia, been in the car, been in the passenger seat, my friend's rolling a joint, and I'm afraid that the cops are going to come past.
I think something you mentioned there about kind of the normalcy you felt when you were going into those stores like Tokyo Smoke and things like that, that aesthetic that eases people's mind and calms them and helps them experience cannabis. That's the first thing I noticed about Astrid, and that's why I've kind of attached myself to Astrid as I've been doing my medical journey, because that's something that's important to me. The store that I worked at in Vancouver, Muse, had an important aesthetic property to it. There's this Apple Store vibe, a little bit Hogwarts, a little bit old library, whatever it is. It made people comfortable, want to have conversations. And I think that's a great segue into what you're doing at Astrid, because that's what I saw the first time I walked in there, an aesthetic and an environment that was welcoming and caring. So what inspired you to start Astrid? Let's kind of go from the start. Let's dig in. This has been a 3-year journey for you. Where have you come from to this point now?
Astrid started with, it started from frustration with the current system back then in Australia. And so I think during Canopy, going to dispensaries, the seed was planted, and I saw what the future could be. I saw that what the world in Australia could be for cannabis. And then when you go on a plane, you come back to Australia, and as soon as you land, it's kind of like going back in time. I had to do my normal job back in Australia, and that was to educate doctors and pharmacists and nurses on the therapeutic use of cannabis. And I was really frustrated every time I would try and educate pharmacists. It's not because pharmacists didn't want to know, it's just because they were so busy. And this is 2019 that I was doing this. And so I would go into a pharmacy, and it would be like a Priceline or a Chemist Warehouse, and it would be just so busy. Like, people be lining up. You have to go down the aisles to get to the pharmacist. They'll be behind the counter, and then they'll put me into the little tea room, and they're like, hey, you just sit here for half an hour, and the pharmacist will come whenever they're free. And every time a pharmacist would sit in front of me, I'll go through the whole thing with them. But I'm pretty good at knowing when people are really listening to me or not. And I can see their eyes glaze over, and I'm like, oh my God, they're not getting it. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because I can sense that they're stressed about the Webster pack that they haven't done yet. I can sense that they've got 5 people waiting in line, and they've got to serve them. And they've got all these other things that they have to do. It's just another thing that they had to add to their skill list, and they didn't have the capacity. And cannabis is complex. It's not an easy kind of counseling medication, easy thing to order in. It's quite difficult, and it's harder than it should be in Australia, to be honest. And so they weren't getting it. And so I found it really inefficient, I guess, because I would be speaking to doctors about a certain product for a certain condition. But then by the time it got to the pharmacy, the patient had a really bad experience. And that end part of the experience was so crucial. No matter how hard you work on the first part of the experience, trying to support doctors and promote them and teach them about cannabis, if the pharmacists were not also equally prepared or equally ready to support the patient, then the patient who's already suffering from anxiety, already suffering from already just overwhelmed, they're accessing legal cannabis for the first time, they're going to have a bad experience, and they're not going to want to do the legal route again. And so that was my starting point. And so my husband and I were having brunch one day, and I guess as most married couples do, you vent to your partner about stuff. And we're having brunch, and I'm like, this is the current system. It's not working. Like, someone needs to do something about this. And so I was like, what if I open a pharmacy, but I specialize in cannabis? And he's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And so then that was when the idea kind of started. I'm like, but I really don't want it to be like a normal pharmacy. And so I knew that when I had the vision for Astrid and I started just like literally had a little book, got a pen. Same thing with the whole Bali experience. I had like an aha moment and I ran, got some paper, I wrote it down, drew up this kind of thing that was in my brain at that time. And I was like, I could do this. And I want it to be really different. And I want it to be, similar to like an experience that I had in Canada. And so that was my starting point. And from there, I didn't realize it'll be much harder than that. But I guess from there it was about, okay, well, if I want to do this, I know that I want to do a pharmacy that specializes in cannabis, but how do I do that? And so then I was like, okay, well, first step is I'm a pharmacist. I can literally get a pharmacy license. So I'm really glad that I hung onto my pharmacy license all those years. And I applied for a pharmacy license and try to get a permit. But before that, you need to get a premises as well. And so you need to choose where you want to do it. And I knew that I think the good thing about me and and Astrid is that I always knew what I wanted, even from the very beginning. The vision for me was very, very clear. Like I knew that I wanted a very sleek, minimalist space. I knew that I wanted green walls. I knew that I wanted to be a really unique space where it didn't look like a pharmacy. I wanted a non-pharmacy pharmacy. I wanted to feel like a cross between a cafe, but also like a space where you can chat to your friends, but then also sell some retail stuff. And I wanted people to question whether it was a pharmacy or not. So I kind of knew that, right? And so that was a really great starting point because then it means when you know what you want, then you know what to say no to. And so when I went to a pharmacy shop fitter, I asked them to do this and they were like, oh no, we don't have what you want, but we have this kind of like fit out layout. You can choose this and we can make it look like a price line. And I was like, oh, no, that's definitely not what I want. And so then I could easily say no to those people because they didn't understand it's not something that they know. It's something that what I want to build is very like boutique and custom built. And so then first thing I did was walk up and down Chapel Street because I knew that I wanted Chapel Street. It was peak lockdowns as well. And I chose one that I really wanted. Is on the side of Chapel Street that I wanted, and because I love that wooden door.
So that wooden door was already there?
It was already there.
I do love that door. It is, yeah, that's real fancy.
I love that door. And it wasn't available on all the websites as well. But when I walked down Chapel Street, I had to double take because I'm like, oh my God, that door's so nice. And there's a number of the agent on the door, on the window. So that I just called the agent right then and there. And I was like, I need to know, can I have this space? And then it worked out. And so they had the space and then I applied for the license and fitting it out wise, me and my friend who is an architect, I called her up and I was like, hey, what are you doing with your life right now? She's like, oh, it's lockdowns. I'm, just chilling really. I was like, I want to do this thing called Astrid and I want to collab with you to build it. And she's like, okay. So she's starting out her own architectural firm. So she was also, female-led, also Asian-led as well. So she and I would, when everyone else was freaking out about COVID, we were like, hustling and trying to like build this thing and like design this thing, which is the best part of the experience, I think, during that time was having something to do during like a really dire time in the world and something really bright and colorful as well. And so we designed it purposefully with, very, I guess, natural materials as well. So everything is kind of like made to reflect the brand, which is very, very plant orientated, very people orientated, made with intent to make people feel more relaxed, make people feel like they want to stick around and talk about cannabis a little bit more. Also, I was very careful about not being overly the top as well. I don't want it to be too in your face about cannabis in case it also turn people away because we are on Chapel Street. And so the purpose of building something brick and mortar like this is to destigmatize. And so if I can convert someone who didn't know that cannabis was legal and was semi against cannabis by making them feel comfortable in Astrid, then I think I've done something right. And so that was the intent of trying to make that balance, right? So making people like myself who are cannabis advocates feel like they want to be there and hang out there and be part of the community and talk to people in the dispensary, but also converting people who were, on the fence or had a stigma associated with them and make them ask questions. So, I remember when the first 6 months when I opened and it was just myself and Judy, I would purposely try to get to know everyone so that I can understand their journey a bit better. And on Saturdays in particular, because there's so much foot traffic on Saturdays, people are, out for brunch and they'll come in because I think we're like an ESOP store. And
Yes.
yeah. And they'll just stand and look at the shelf. But I know that they're wanting me to ask them questions. And so I'll just wait until they're comfortable. And I'm like, how's your weekend going? Can I ask, if there's something I can help you with? And then they're like, oh, what is this place? And then that really sparks a conversation because I'm like, we actually a dispensary, we focus on medical cannabis dispensing, but also education as well. And they're like, oh, we thought it was a really kind of dirty drug, but it makes this place makes it look like it's really clean and accessible, and then that gives me a platform to really educate people, and they would then tell their friends, and that's how we kind of started in the beginning because everyone within this community would just tell them about all this experience they had going to a dispensary, and it wasn't really about access from the very beginning because honestly, I made a loss for a long time when I first opened. But for me, it wasn't about that. It was about if I can just have conversations and if people can give me just 3 or 5 minutes of their time and really listen and they could tell their friends, that was, first 6 months, that's all I wanted. Because then I can understand what it was that I wasn't doing right. Maybe if it was a bad experience, then maybe you can tell me why. And if it was a good experience, what can I do better? And so yes, that's kind of why we made the aesthetics the way it is. So everything is intentional. The green walls, the terrazzo stone, the wooden shelves, and the gold letters, that's all really, really intentional. And it's interesting as now the brand and the business is growing and I think about, well, where do I want this to grow and what I want it to do? And we're building out Byron Bay now and it's going to look a little bit different as well. And because I really want each store to have its own identity, its own personality, because I do feel like community is everything for me. And South Yarra is really based around community and it is really reflective of my journey back then and my relationship back then with cannabis as well. So everything you see is my relationship with cannabis. But I think that in Byron Bay, there's a different relationship with cannabis here. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of kind of like grassroots underground movement here. And so a lot of what I'm doing at Astrid Byron Bay here is very moody. It's very mysterious. It's a lot darker, the green shade. I'm using material that is reflective of the hinterland. We're using rocks to reflect the ocean around here. So yeah, our strategy is to make sure that our brand reflects people and community.
Would I be right in assuming as well that kind of the mission in South Yarra would be to change people's minds, people who don't have a relationship with cannabis? Whereas in Byron, you've probably already got people on your side, but you're actually trying to convince them that this like regulated medical market is okay.
Exactly.
They're two very different demographics, aren't they?
Exactly. So different. And you really have to be able to cater to that as well. I think that people here are so open about cannabis, like so different to South Yarra. People here would be happy to roll a joint and have it on the street here and not be afraid of, what people say, because it's normal. And it's about being able to pitch the legal framework in a way that still honors their values, I believe. And I think you have to do that in a very kind of respectful way as well, because there is a beautiful story here and you don't want to just come here and overtake it. It has to be something that we do in unison and collaboratively as well.
I don't want to sound like a typical uninformed male here, but this question really comes from the point of wanting to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Why is it so important that Astrid and other businesses are female-led?
This is super important to me, and it's. I think when I first launched Astrid, I wanted to really highlight that it was female-led because in my experience with cannabis to date, a lot of the big meetings or the big business meetings I went to, it's a lot of male people representing different companies, and that's fine. Like that's perfectly fine. But I think it's also when you have an opportunity to be one of the first female brands, and if you can be able to highlight that and hone into that niche, I think it's a really great thing to do. And it really also softens, I believe, the company and the people that we attract as well. And so I think that's also really important. The other thing is I think that being female-led, for me, I'm a very different leader in that I'm probably someone that cries a lot or someone that has many meltdowns. I'm not tough. Like I'm a very earnest leader and I'm very probably too empathetic sometimes. And I think that is why we've been able to attract certain talent as well. People often come to Astrid because they want to be part of a team that really care about each other. And that's something that I've embedded in the team. And I've made sure that if you do want to join this team, culturally, you need to be able to, look out for each other. You need to be able to understand where someone else's journey is beginning and ending and know where you can add value to them. They say that in business, hiring is the most important thing. And so we've been very strategic about who we hire, because if we don't hire the right people, then our patients are not going to get the right support or experience. Even in the early days, I chose to hire slower and chose to get to know people slower before jumping in and hiring them. And that also was, a decision that another business person would say, no, if you need someone to hire now because your business is growing. But I chose to do the opposite. And I chose, you know what, I'm just going to wait until I understand the business well enough and until the right person comes along and someone that I know that's going to be in the business long term and can really understand my vision.
As a patient of yours, this is something that I love, that when I do come into the pharmacy, whether it's Tanya, Pavana, Sarah, Joe, Bash, these people feel...
I love that you know all their names.
I feel like I have a relationship with them, and it's, that's what makes me feel good about using cannabis in Australia, because despite my 2 years in Canada, despite the support from my family and my partner, there's still that stigma and taboo. So when I can come into a place, I'm with a mate and I'm picking up my prescription and they see that experience, it changes people's minds.
Absolutely.
The vision has well and truly come to life. And I constantly spruik you guys and have to remind people that I'm not advertising, I'm not being paid for this. It's just a real experience. I think there's a lot of, I spend a bit of time on Reddit and online, and I see what patients' challenges are and what they go through and what they deal with other clinics and other places, and not getting callbacks and not getting an email for 6 weeks and products being consistently out of stock. Those are things I'm not experiencing at Astrid. I'm not having those challenges. So it's clear that investment in aesthetic obviously is working, but that investment in people is really working. And for you to go from 1-2 staff initially to 30 and keeping that quality, I think is testament to how much you care about what you're doing and the people that come in.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it goes both ways, because having 30 staff is not easy. It's difficult. Like it was easier when there was 5 staff, where communication was a lot easier because there's only 5 people. So there's no miscommunication. But as you grow, you also have to think about ways, well, how do you keep people happy? How do you keep people up to date with the knowledge? Because the cannabis space is so ever growing. But also, how do you understand where this individual that you've hired is going in their career, and how can you help them? How can you give them the skills that they need? And sometimes people don't know what they want right away, but they just know that they want to be here because they're passionate. Like, I do have stuff like that as well, who are here because they love being part of the community, but they don't really know where they want to be. And that's okay. And so I love being able to help people explore what they want to do in life. And I think because when I was younger, I had really good mentors, and they also, helped me kind of like navigate a few of my, career decisions as well. And so I love being able to do that within the team. So within our team, we have, monthly team catch-ups, and we do a lot of training. We do a lot of workshops to help to upskill pharmacists, particularly because right now in pharmacy land, there's not much education for pharmacists. So every pharmacist that comes to us comes from ground zero. So we have to train them from the ground up. And we've literally created systems from scratch, because there was no standard system that you're taught in pharmacy school. You literally have to just create something and keep tweaking at it and make it work. And then when new people come, you train them. But it goes beyond the technical skills, because the hardest thing to teach is teaching them to love the plant. And doing that in a way that's creative, in a way that is inclusive, in a way that is collaborative as well, to give your people a voice is, for me, the most rewarding thing about Astrid. Going to those monthly team meetings, seeing my team's eyes light up when we put them through a game and they have to learn about, a different plant or different product, and they get really, really excited. And they're all writing things on butcher paper. Like, that's, for me, like, win. Like, that's all I need in life, really. But to be able to keep doing that, I think is going to be really, really hard in future as our team grows, but something that I'm so mindful of as well. So I want to be able to keep providing this support and this sense of family within our Astrid team and community.
I think it's really good to have these conversations to gain perspective from outside of what's going on. You know, I had Dr. Matty Moore from WA on the show a few months ago, and he really made me reconsider the way I use cannabis medically and how purposeful, how mindful, and how thoughtful I am. Even you sharing these stories now makes me consider, well, yeah, what are the perspectives of the healthcare professionals in this industry? We do know a lot about what the challenges for patients are, but what are the challenges for you? And, you know, you've shared a lot of the successes and the journey and the story. And I want to dive into what some of those challenges and barriers are. But before we do that, I thought we might break up our conversation and play a little game. How do you feel about doing a quiz about the weird old-timey history of pharmacy?
Sure. I won't say that I'm going to be very good at it. I'm not very good at games.
Well, the purpose of this is that we all learn a little something. So even if you get every question wrong, we're going to learn something along with the listener today.
Okay.
So here I've got 7 questions about the strange history of pharmacy. So question 1, true or false? Coca-Cola was invented by a pharmacist.
True.
That is correct. In 1886, pharmacist John S. Pemberton created the drink as a cure for common ailments. Its name comes from its original key ingredients, cocaine and extracts from the cola nut. So they're onto something good back then. Well done, 1 from 1. Question 2. What was the first country in the 21st century to legalize the consumption and cultivation of cannabis nationally? Was it Thailand, the United States, Uruguay, or Canada?
Oh, not Canada, not Thailand, Uruguay.
That is correct. So Uruguay legalized in 2013 the cultivation, possession, consumption nationally. Canada followed in 2018. Thailand followed in 2022. And the United States is still not federally legal. So there's certain states you can go to where you have a good time. And then there's certain states you go to where you'll be jailed for the rest of your life. Awesome, you're 2 from 2. Joseph Lister was an English doctor and surgeon who believed in the concept of using sterilization and antiseptics in the operating room. Because of this practice, more patients survived surgeries and countless infections were prevented. What common household germ-killing product was named after Joseph Lister?
Listerine.
Oh, that is correct. You are killing this. 3 from 3. True or false? Cannabis was the first product to ever be sold online.
Oh, I want to say true.
That is also true. So though it was technically illegal, or definitely illegal, in the early 1970s, Stanford students bought a bag of weed from MIT students using similar computer network principles called the ARPANET that would eventually become the internet.
Love it.
Question 5. The first documented use of cannabis was in 2800 BCE. In which country or region? Was it Chile/South America, China/Central Asia, or Congo/Africa?
China, Central Asia.
That is correct. While the use of industrial hemp dates back further, the first documented case of personal cannabis use dates back to 2800 BC when it was listed in the Emperor Shen Nung's, who was regarded as the father of Chinese medicine, in his Pharmacopoeia. Therapeutic indications of cannabis are mentioned in the texts of Indian Hindus, Assyrians, Greeks, and Romans, and these texts reported cannabis to treat a vast array of different health problems, including arthritis, depression, inflammation, lack of appetite, and asthma. So we've known this stuff for so long.
Amazing. Wow.
All right, 2 to go. You are killing it. Question 6, true or false? Bible cysts are called that because one of the best treatments for these cysts that appear on your hands is to whack it with a heavy book.
True.
In 1743, German anatomist Lorenz Heister wrote down additional treatment for Bible cysts, which included strapping a bullet that had killed an animal to the cyst or touching it with a dead man's hand. So we've certainly come a long way, but the whacking it with the book or the Bible is still done.
Wow. Actually, yeah, that probably worked really well.
All right. Lucky last. According to Dr. Thomas Jefferson Ritter's 1910 book, Mother's Remedies, over 1,000 tried and tested remedies from mothers of the United States and Canada, what now illicit drug was prescribed for hay fever, indigestion, fatigue, eye pain, and hemorrhoids? Was it A, methamphetamine, B, heroin, or C, cocaine?
Cocaine.
That is correct. Cocaine for hay fever. clears the sinuses. You've got 7 out of 7. You know the weird history of pharmacy, Lisa.
That's pretty good considering that I never studied in.
I think it's working for you, clearly. All right, let's talk a little bit about the barriers and challenges of this industry. We understand a lot of the complaints from the patient side of things. You know, the drug driving laws are a big issue that we really need to address, stock availability, cost, social stigma. But for you as a health provider, what are the issues for you? How challenging is it to operate in this industry, and what still needs to be improved?
That's a really good question. And I think that all those things that you've mentioned before, the underlying problem with that is regulations. And again, the underlying problem, I can list a lot of problems that healthcare professionals are facing, but at the core, the reason why these problems are arising is because of regulations. And so I think, a couple of years ago, one of the biggest barriers we were facing was patient access. I think that's no longer an issue. I think access is pretty easy nowadays. But I think now it's about actually looking at the policies within our current framework and then being able to update those policies so that it can make the journey for the pharmacist, the doctor, the patient, the distributor, the supplier, the grower easier. What's holding back the industry is a lot of regulations that definitely need to be changed. Speaking specifically for pharmacists, a lot of the issues that we're facing is not because we don't want to make people's lives easier, but because there's a certain level of compliance that we have to stick to. And so the compliance is what really kills me, because it doesn't really make sense sometimes why the rules are there, but then the rules are there, which means that we can't be able to, for example, one of the biggest barriers I'm facing right now for patients is the out of stock issues. And now from a pharmacist perspective, I can't just chop and change things without a prescription. I'd love to. That would make my life easier, and then also I can provide a better experience for my patients if I can help them change products. But regulatory-wise, it's not allowed because cannabis is put into our medical framework, and our medical framework has been designed for pharmaceutical medicines, which are consistent. They're the same. They're made synthetically. Whereas cannabis is a plant. It doesn't always fit into our current system because plants change. Each grow is going to be slightly different. There's going to be slightly different terpenes and cannabinoids in each single one. And also, they're not going to be bioequivalent. There's not going to be a day where each one is going to be bioequivalent, no matter how many studies you do. And so that makes it really hard when you're on a prescription perspective. If we do want to change something over, technically it needs to there needs to be a new prescription to reflect that change. And that admin regulatory hurdle is what's holding a lot of access back right now and causing a lot of frustrations and probably a lot of Reddit wars right now because of that. And, there's probably a few people who are working in the grey, but I'm a big believer in if you want things to change in our current system, you have to work with regulators, not against them. We've mapped out all of 2023 within Astrid, and we've been planning this for the past couple of months, so we're really excited for this year. But one of our plans is to work with the Pharmacy Guild and work with the PSA or work with the TGA to be able to understand, well, why are these rules here, and is there a way that we can make them better for pharmacists so in turn patients are better looked after? Because at the end of the day, it's about patient safety. If we're able to provide a better process and a better policy that helps patients get better, then it's in everyone's interest. But what would not work if we kind of do it and work against regulators? And that's not what I want to do. I'd rather do things right from the very beginning and get their buy-in and their understanding of where we're at right now, what are our real barriers, and how can we strategically work together to make it better. And if that means I can help them put together points or frameworks to meet in the middle, that's okay, because I think that's the first step for 2023, particularly whilst we're still in the medicinal framework. And that's a big hurdle for us right now. And so even within the pharmacy space, there's another hurdle that they're facing is stock and the way that stock is sent to us as well. And just little simple things like medical cannabis, most of it is Schedule 8. which means that it's stored in a vault or in safes usually. But most pharmacies around Australia at 200 square meters, like there's only so many safes you can fit in before you run out of space. So personally, I believe that medical cannabis should be rescheduled to a different schedule, because cannabis is not a narcotic. Like, it should not be sitting there with endone and Norspan and everything else. Like, it, for me, doesn't make sense. But I understand why it is a Schedule 8. And so I'd love to see a day where it can be moved to like a different schedule or a unique framework where we don't have to take it out of the vault every single time. The fact that it is in the vault makes pharmacists' life so hard. Like, you have no idea. There is an extra level of compliance that we have to go through, a different level of auditing and stock control that we have to do. And it's difficult.
I love the point that you make about working with the regulators rather than against. I think it's really challenging for anyone who's a cannabis advocate to go from that point where once upon a time we were agitating for change and we were doing something, we were underground and we were pushing these messages and we were kind of being rebellious, to now operating in a legal space where it is far better to work with the industry. I noticed it a lot in Canada, particularly in Vancouver. They had an existing cannabis culture that was kind of wiped out by federal legalization. And you had all this resistance and frustration. But I always thought it was better to be in the industry working with the regulators and working with the current rules and trying to affect those and change those rather than just being stubborn. But it does take a little bit of kind of courage and changing of mindset to go, God, these rules suck. I'm so outraged about them. Okay, I'm going to work with these people and try and change their mind, kill them with kindness, give them suggestions, help them.
Yeah.
Because if you do just get frustrated and angry, they're not going to reach out to you. They're not going to want to hear from you. And I imagine that the culture you're building at Astrid, you guys would be looked to within the industry as a bit of a voice of reason because of that integrity.
That was one of my business learnings, I think, in the early days. When I first started Astrid, I used to get frustrated all the time because, I'd hit roadblocks every single day. And I'm like, this is so frustrating. And I'd blame people, blame the industry, or blame the police, or whatever it is. And what I learned from that was you can blame people all day, but nothing's going to happen. And the only place where change will happen if you change it. Because if you want to change it and you can convince a community of people to change it, then you have a movement, and then that's becomes a voice that people will listen to. But you complaining and bitching about things or the current system, it's not going to change. And so I've learned that, and I've also learned that in business you got to be great problem solvers. You can't just be angry at your business for not doing well. You got to figure out why it's not doing well, and then figure out what you can do to make it better. And so that was one of my learnings as well. I learned that I got to be a better problem solver, and not only that, teach my team to have that mentality where they don't complain first. Like I'm like, look, you can be really angry for like 30 seconds, but let's change our mentality. Let's think about the possibilities. What can we do together? And that really then shifts the conversation going forward for other people, because if you then become that person where you don't, like when a patient comes in, complain about the system, you're like, well, we could be doing this, we could be doing this. It then creates conversation, and then it creates it also changes that person's mindset that you're talking to as well, because then they also think, okay, well, maybe I could do this, maybe I could write a letter to my prime minister about this thing that I'm really frustrated about. So it's then creating good habits in other people, and that's also, I believe, cultural as well.
I do really appreciate that you see the responsibility that you have. It kind of leads me to my next question about the link between kind of capitalism and cannabis. Like, how do you ensure that your patients remain front and center whilst also trying to have a sustainable and profitable business? That's really important. It's great for you guys to have all these values and these ideas and build this community. But if it's not a business that works, well, then you'll disappear, and 18,000 patients and counting will lose this connection. So how do you reconcile those two things? Patients at the center whilst also running a business?
It's a really great question, and something that I've had to reflect on a lot as well. And it really comes down to a person's vision and where they foresee their company going and what they want for themselves as well. And I've had a lot of time to think about this and where I think that I would like Astrid to grow. The beauty of Astrid is that we're fully bootstrapped. It means I fully own the business. I'm the only shareholder. And so
if I want to slow down, I can slow down. If I want to speed up, I can speed up. And it's totally up to me. The other reason why we've been able to, I think, grow as fast is because we've been able to pivot so quickly as well. We don't have shareholders to answer to. It's just me. If I don't like something, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to change it. And I can do it overnight. I'll just think of a strategy, ask the team, let's collaborate and let's roll it out because it's not working. And I always tell the team, don't be afraid of making mistakes. We'll collaborate and we'll think of something, but if it doesn't work, we try it for a month, 2 months, doesn't work, then no one's to blame. It means we've tried it and then we can try something else. And the same thing goes with growth as well. Like there's a point last year, I think, where we were growing really fast and that's great. But for me, it's not about growing at all costs. For me, it's about making sure that my people who work for Astrid are passionate and happy. And then also, in turn, my patients are happy. But if you're growing at all costs and you're not looking after your people, they're going to burn out. And I saw my team burn out and I was heartbroken. And so what we did was we put a hold on growth. I said no to clinics. I said no to people wanting to collaborate. And I just allowed Astrid to take a big step backwards and plateau. And for me, that was okay because we're still paying the bills, we're still paying wages, and that was enough. If we could pause for 3 months, 6 months to figure out operationally why is everyone burning out and what we can do to better support my team, that for me is a better long-term strategy than, pumping all these growth things, putting all these new initiatives, and then everyone's burning out. And then 2 years later going, oh my God, the culture is really, really bad. And so my answer to that is I want to grow, but I want to keep it very boutique. I would like to have, one Astrid in every single state, but not at the stake of my people. If it means that if after Byron Bay, for example, I realize that doing Byron Bay plus, South Yarra is too much for my people, I would, hand on heart, just say no to growth and focus on those 2 stores, making sure that they get better, and then go from there. So
I think that's really important for your patients to hear. And that's the group of people I want to hear that message, because I think there are a lot of organizations out there seeing this gold rush, seeing this opportunity, and that it's an absolute Wild West industry. Throw things at the wall, see if they stick. But you see the responsibility you have to your patients and to your people whilst also trying to achieve those goals. So you're not going to compromise the integrity for your patients and your people just for the sake of making some more money and growing. And, I'm grateful for that as a patient of yours, but I hope that other patients of Astrid and also patients that are disappointed with their clinics and their providers and their pharmacists understand why somewhere like Astrid exists and why that mission is important and why that even aesthetic is important. People can go to Priceline or Terry White and get their cannabis. I'm not having the same experience when I go into a place like that. So thank you for being so mindful and so considerate. You mentioned the movement and the people and the crew. I think Astrid Assembly is a great example of that movement, that you see a bigger responsibility to this community than just being a service provider, but actually creating events, creating experiences. Because I haven't been inspired by anything in Australia the way that I was by the Astrid Assembly. My enthusiasm keeps growing, but I haven't seen anything like that here. So let's talk about that a little bit, as in depth or as briefly as you like. But that was an amazing event, something that I couldn't believe I got to go to. So talk to us about Astrid Assembly.
Astrid Assembly is, it was an idea that came to me because working in South Yarra, a lot of the things that happen, it happens because we saw a gap. It was a need. It's not because we want to make a nice event. It's because we realize it's what's needed for our community. And so it started because I was working downstairs and helping some patients and talking to some patients, and sometimes some really magical things that happens in that little space downstairs where someone comes in to get the cannabis, but then 2 other people are waiting, and then someone talks about their sativa flower, and then suddenly it's like a whole, group workshop thing, and it's kind of really beautiful. And we've had people share their stories with each other just like openly, like these strangers just share their stories openly within Dispensary. And I was like, wow, our patients are such awesome people. Like they're such awesome people to want to share these stories with each other. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if we can do this on scale? Like if we have all of our patients and all of industry and all politicians in one room and share the same purpose, because ultimately everyone that comes in and that I talk to are so passionate. They're there for the same purpose. And I saw that. And at Astrid, we had the beauty of seeing that on a personal level every single time that someone comes in. But I thought, everyone that's coming in has the same purpose. Let's just do this on scale. And so I had this vision that I wanted to build this really unique event, and I want it to be really collaborative and also community based. And I wanted to give patients a platform to feel like they're really heard in this industry, because sometimes I feel like that is sometimes missed in our current industry. And we are very lucky at Astrid in that, because we're healthcare professionals, we hear your stories. I hear every single story, and let me tell you, it really impacts me. Like every single story, I remember everyone. I remember everyone's story. And I really feel like these are the stories that are going to change the industry, that are going to change the regulations. But if the politicians don't hear the stories, then they're not going to change the rules. And so Astrid Assembly was created as a platform for patients' voices to be heard amongst politicians, amongst industry, so that things will change. And it was interesting, after the assembly, people came up to me from industry and they're like, we didn't realize that patients were going through that, or we didn't realize this. And that's what I wanted. It wasn't about being a beautiful event. Like, I wanted that because I'm very aesthetically aligned, but I also wanted to be a space for connection and collaboration and working together. And we had this video that was filming people at the assembly and just capturing really authentic and raw footage of people. And one of the footages, it was someone from the industry, and he was saying that in order for this industry to grow, we need to rise together. We need to rise as like a tide together in order for us to move forward. And that really resonated with me.
It was such an amazing night, and it just gave me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps still talking about it now. So it's amazing that it exists, and I'm excited about what's going to come next, because you put on an incredible event and it made people connect. It made people have conversations that we aren't usually able to have. So thank you for that opportunity, and not to put the pressure on, but I am looking forward to the next one.
No, we decided, because I think last year's was a bit of a test to see if there's something that people would want to come to. And I feel like the response we had was people want to come to the next one. And so I'm really excited to start planning the next one. And I already got some really amazing ideas on how we can make it bigger and better. So watch this space.
Well, one of the last things I kind of want to get your thoughts on, just in the vein of being a healthcare provider, what are your thoughts on recreational cannabis? Not so much that alt med question of when will we be legalized, because I think we could be there in 6 months or 10 years. It's so hard to know when we're going to take, a step forward and two back, or if we're just going to dive in like Thailand kind of did. It's all over the place. It's less about that and more just, what do you think the place for recreational cannabis is, and do you think there is one? Do you think medical and recreational can exist in tandem? As a healthcare provider, are you worried that it compromises it? What are your thoughts on recreational use?
So my first response is I'm definitely pro recreational use. I have nothing against that. However, I believe that it should be something that is thoughtful, in that we can't just become recreational without thinking about how the system's going to work. The medical system needs to be needs some time to evolve first. But if we decide tomorrow that it's going to be recreational, it's not going to work well together now, because right now we have a pseudo recreational market within the medical market. And so it's going to clash. But I believe that people are using medical cannabis medicinally, and I believe there's a place for people using it recreationally. And I believe there can be an overlap. However, I also believe in building and having building blocks for everything that you do. Like regulators need to make sure that everything that they build from a policy perspective is thought out. So the medical market, they've rolled out some regulations, but is it thought out fully yet? Probably not. Like, we need some time to really think about how we can really streamline those regs, make sure that everyone is aligned with those regs. And then later on, when we're ready for rec, then at least we understand, okay, well, this is the framework. These are the boundaries for recreational. These are the boundaries for medical. And here's the overlap. I believe that they can work together, but we need to understand what that looks like, and not just roll out regs and just make things recreational from the get-go.
I think that's a great answer. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that kind of pseudo-recreational thing that's existing within the medical industry right now?
Yeah. So there's a lot of patients that use the medicinal system right now because they're using it for recreational purposes. And it could be because they don't want to go down the street and get cannabis from the guy behind 7-Eleven anymore, and they want it to be legal. And that's totally fine as well. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then there's patients who are using it because they've got really, really bad chronic pain every single day. I think pseudo recreational patients are using it because they've got conditions sometimes, but most of the time because they want to feel good. I'm completely okay with both. I just believe that the regulations has to support both.
Yeah, it's almost like it's not so much a judgment on people doing that. It's just that it's so burdensome on the system and on that healthcare providers to be doing that for people whilst there are people with genuine needs.
Exactly. And I think that if we do turn recreational, I want it to be great for Australia. I want us to be ready for it, because I think it'd be wonderful. But we also need to make sure that we understand what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to be thoughtful, because I know that even culturally compared to Canada versus Australia, my experiences of recreational cannabis here are much more like an additional substance. Like, you know, someone's drinking, someone's having a good time at a party, so they add that cannabis on. And I think that is something we need to address as a society, because it links a little bit to our substance use in general. You know, the prevalence of alcohol, the inability to kind of socialize without substance being added to that. So I think it's really great that you're saying that. We don't really know what the full answer is, but there certainly needs to be considerations about who we are as a country, who we are as a culture, and how it can benefit Australians. You know, I think it'd be really important, for example, to see a lot of Australian products coming through, and so that we're building an industry that's sustainable here, and that we're not just kind of going from Germany or Canada and making them richer. We can make our own country richer.
Exactly. And I think that when we build this framework, I'd love for the government to ask industry for advice on how we can best build it, because I think things like that can be a whole pillar of a strategy that we can roll out for the recreational market. And you know, your experience and even my experience, because I also use it for sleep and sometimes anxiety as well. I think I'm definitely a pseudo recreational patient sometimes, in that I use it sometimes just to feel better after a long day, or I've really got, you know, insomnia and I can't sleep. And so I would then be a crossover between both recreational and medicinal. It's so many different ways that we can look at it, but I believe that we need to be able to work together to find out what that system looks like.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that adds an important frame of reference to what you're saying about what we need to do. You know, you're admitting to your own use. It's not about judgment of people. It's just about having the right frameworks and regulations. So, I mean, you're one of us, Lisa. It's great to see. So as we get to the end of the show, the last segment is called Pauls of Wisdom. And this is where you share like a little dinner party fact or something that the average person needs to know about cannabis.
Something that's different, or something that, you know, naive people don't know?
Perhaps think of it this way. If someone was at one of your dinner parties and was perhaps a little negative about cannabis or didn't know about cannabis, what would you give them to take away, to have a think about? I mean, you mentioned it with even people coming into the store in those early days. What kind of seeds were you planting in their mind to just make them think differently?
Well, I think in those situations, and particularly with, for example, my family's a great one, right? Because my family are immigrants, so they already have this stigma. And when I first launched Astrid, I didn't tell them it was a cannabis pharmacy for at least a year until it was something that's more legitimate and people were knowing more about it. And then I was like, you know what, Mum and Dad, we're actually selling cannabis this year. And then they're like, oh, okay. And then they walked out and I had to think about it.
It's definitely very confronting for people. And then there's that cultural layer, which I can't empathize with, but I certainly understand. Emily Lee Young is an Asian Canadian woman that I've had on the show, and she spoke about the same thing. You know, her parents are Chinese, and even though that foundation goes right back to China, it was a struggle. And it was actually that foundation in China that helped her convince her parents otherwise.
Exactly. And I think that's it. It's education. And so I think theoretically it's hard for ethnic parents to understand. And so what I did with my parents is I literally walked them through the shop, and I showed them pictures of the plant, and then I showed them oils. And I said, look, this is a bottle, this is a syringe, and here is a plant, and this is how the extraction process works. And I showed them how that would actually be made and put into the bottle, and how the bottle is actually poured out, and how you put it under the tongue, and that's it. I also even got my own prescription and opened it up, and I allowed them to smell it, because when people smell things, they have a sense of, I guess, memory, or they feel a different sensation. And so because it smelled like lemon, they felt like, oh, this smells really nice. And so they disassociated the stigma immediately because of the smell. And so I think that is something that I often talk about in dinner parties, because people always think it's like, you know, some guy that's rolling a joint and really, really high and stoned the next day. But it's not the case. Most of the time, you know, like on Friday, I had a vape of my own flower, And the next day I woke up even earlier than I normally do and did more work. So it's not the case at all.
Well, I guess your Paul of wisdom is coming to Astrid and have a chat.
Yes, that is the key takeaway here.
Well, I could talk to you all day. To me, Lisa, you are the number one person to watch in Australian cannabis. I love everything you're doing. You do it with integrity, you do it with passion, and you do it so mindfully. Where can our listeners find you online?
They can find us on Instagram at astrid.dispensary, and also our website is astrid.health.
Thank you so much for being on the show today.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music written and produced by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram at Give and Toke, or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. You'll also find us on Twitter and Facebook. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please be aware of local laws.